Good morning and welcome to today. We're here in Castlemaine. I'm Ivan Carter and I'm with Connecting Country, which is a community organisation in Castlemaine, Victoria that focuses on landscape restoration as well as education and landcare support. We're here today because we've got a great new project that we'd like to show you. It's called the Birdwalking for Beginners project. And what we're trying to do is to get people out that perhaps haven't done much bird walking and get them out in beautiful sunny Castlemaine along Forest Creek. And it's a very easy track and we've got some sites along the way. And the aim of the project really is to provide an accessible path in an area where we know there's some good bird habitat. And that is mostly been achieved through the work of some really great volunteers and some community organisations. Now, I'll begin with acknowledging that the country we're standing on today is the country of the Dja Dja Wurrung people, and I'd like to pay my respect for their elders, past, present and emerging, and just highlight and acknowledge the sustainable land management over tens of thousands of years and some of the assets that we do have left here. Now, the walk today is about 1.5 kilometres. It's very flat and it follows along Forest Creek. And we've got 8 sites picked out that we're going to stop at. And we'll talk a little bit about the birds that we might see there. We'll listen and see what birds we can hear. And we'll also talk a bit about the habitat requirements and some of the habitat features of those sites. Now, this walk is to be done in conjunction with a brochure that we've produced, the Birdwalk for Beginners brochure, and it's got a map. So if you fold out the brochure, we've got a map in the middle here that shows you the 8 sites and where they are. And most importantly, it's got QR codes for each of the 8 sites that you can scan, and it will bring up on your phone or your tablet or laptop. It will bring up the bird list for those sites, as well as a bit about the habitat, and you can click on each bird and you can go to a site that will show you photographs and distribution, as well as the bird calls for each site, for each bird, sorry. So do get a copy of this. It will be available in the Tourist Information Centre, as well as Connecting Country and a few of the local retail stores as well. So the other brochure that is great to get a copy, which you can also get through Connecting Country and the Information Centre, is the Woodland Birds of Central Victoria brochure. So that's a hard copy. It's got some great colour photographs as well as a little bit about each bird. Now, the other thing I'd like to mention before we start is we're joined here today by some community members here to my right that are involved with some of the groups that have been involved with the bird walk. So we've got Damien Kelly here, who is involved with Birdlife Castlemaine district, as well as the Castlemaine Field Nats. We've got Jenny Rowland here, who is involved with the Castlemaine Field Naturalists group. And we've got Ewan Moore as well here, who's also with the Castlemaine Field Nats. And we've got Jane Rusden here, who is with Birdlife Castlemaine district. Now, these are some of our prominent community bird lovers, twitchers, experts. They have done surveys here before. They walk this area quite a lot. I'll let them do little introductions of anything that I might have missed, but I'll hand over now to Damien Kelly, who will give a bit of an introduction about Site 1 and talk a little bit about the birds we might see and how we identify birds. Thank you, Damien.
Right. Well, I always say when you start a bird walk, just stop and listen. And when you're standing here, we've got these really big old ironbark trees. And when they're in flower, you get all sorts of honey eaters. But just standing here at the moment, I can hear the magpies. A crested pigeon just flew across the road in front of me. I've heard a grey thrush calling in the distance, as well as pardalotes. There's also some New Holland honeyeaters calling. So when you stand there, just listen. You may not see some of the birds, like the magpies you will see easily because they're quite large. The pardalotes are often hard to find, but you will hear them. Their call is quite strong. So always start, and this is a very good place to start just because of the trees. Birds love anything that's flowering, but it's also good cover here for the smaller birds. You'll always find birds like a good cover, thick cover, and this is a good place to start your walk. So,
The other thing I forgot to mention as well,
how do we segue?
just before we start, is Castlemaine Landcare as well. Damien is involved in Castlemaine Landcare, and they've done a... Oh, no, sorry, not Damien. Jenny and Ewan involved with Castlemaine Landcare, and they've done a huge amount of work along this trail here in restoration as well as reed removal, and I'm sure Jenny and Ewan will talk about that as we go. So
we might get... work out how to segue, really.
I'll pass that over to you guys. Yeah, we'll probably just start walking. I think we'll film as we walk. And,
Yeah.
I'll cut that bit out.
You want to say anything now?
Yeah, do you want to say something now, Ewan,
About the Landcare?
Yeah, some of the Landcare stuff?
Yes, well, this area along Forest Creek was originally severely degraded as a result of the century of gold mining activity. Over the last 20 years or so, Castlemaine Landcare Group has done a lot of weed removal, things like gorse and broom, blackberry, etc., and have planted trees, and this is an ongoing, and shrubs, and more recently a lot of understory. And this is an ongoing process. We'll see more of it as we walk down, but as you start the walk, on your right hand side, on the other side of the creek, are some of the earlier plantings, and they're now getting up quite well. Closer to the track are more recent plantings that have happened in the last 2 or 3 years, and they're starting to become established. So, and they're all improving the habitat for birds and other animals throughout the area. So, Jenny, do you want to say anything more? Or?
You might start walking down and see what birds we can hear and see. How old do you think they are, Ewan?
My understanding is that they're about 20 years, those plantings, silver wattles and various eucalypts and that, and the creek line along here, the reeds that you see down there, they're native. They're part of the native vegetation around here, and with time they will be reduced as the trees grow up and increase shading over the creek. As you walk along this area, keep your eye open across the creek for various honey eaters and that sort of thing in the trees opposite. Also smaller birds that might be feeding in the reeds and the grasses.
The rufous whistler calling over there, beautifully. Rufous whistlers and grey fantails calling over in the trees across the creek. And there's lots of little birds buzzing away down in the grasses down below. We might catch up with them later.
can see a white-faced heron flying, the grey bird. They are quite common along here. They like the water, they eat the frogs, and you'll see them just suddenly fly up. They're very cryptic birds, but when you disturb them, they fly up silently and they'll float along. I always find them interesting. They seem so fragile, and yet they float along the river, or the creek in this case. But you'll see them along here quite a bit, especially if you stop and have a close look. We can hear the grey thrush calling in the background still. That's why it's very important to have this dense cover along the creek here. That makes a difference for a lot of the birds. And all the low shrubby stuff, some of it's still a bit weedy. I can see thistles and whatnot, but the thistles attract goldfinches, which are an introduced species, but they look quite pretty. And you'll see a lot of red-browed finches along here from time to time, as well as yellow-rumped thornbills. And so, even though this looks a bit messy, a lot of the small birds like it, particularly because of the seeds. So a lot of the seed eaters come along here all the time.
Great, Damien. What would be the sort of 5 most common birds do you think you'd see along the vegetation corridor?
The finches and the red-browed ones, they stand out quite a bit. The yellow-rumped thornbills, which are sometimes called butterbums because they're bright yellow, and you'll tell what they are because when they fly up, you'll just see a splash of yellow. So they're very easy to pick up. Magpies along here always. And sometimes in the reeds you might hear reed warblers in spring in particular, and they've got quite a loud call. You'll hear them for sure. Not this time of year, but in spring when you look at all the rushes and reeds along the creek here. Other birds that you might see occasionally, but it'll be more in the denser stuff, is the grey fantails. And in spring you will hear cuckoos, particularly fantail cuckoos. Probably from my experience the most common here. The other bird which we saw or heard back further is the crested pigeons. Again, they're seed eaters and they like this sort of messy country because there's plenty of seeds.
Great. Thanks, Damien. We might make our way down to Site 2 now and just see what we can see along the way. Just a question for Jenny as we walk along the way. Jenny, how often do groups like Castlemaine Landcare get together for working bees?
Well, our convener, Christine Kilmartin, and the committee are very active, and we have regular working bees at different sites along the Forest Creek, just about every fortnight, I think, and definitely right through the year, with different activities timed as to what's going on with the growing seasons, etc. So there's continual weeding we have to do, as we can see along here, but you can see how successful all these shrubs are going in this first leg of the walk along here, and with time they will swamp out the weeds, we hope. That's the plan. And yes, but we'll come to some other sites along the walk where I'll talk more about specific activities. But it's a very active group, and a lot of thoughts going into what plants are going where. Christine, before the working bees, has all these stakes with coloured ties on them, so we know what plants go in what spot. And so it's very carefully organised as to what plants are suited to down near the water or up the slopes, trying to get restore the normal balance of the ecosystem here, which is fantastic.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Jenny. Just another question while you were sort of answering that one. What sort of birds would you first see return to these sort of smaller shrubs, like the earlier birds to return to these kind of sites?
Well, I guess once you get a bit of understory, as Damien said, the smaller birds will come in. A lot of fairy wrens liked a lot of dense cover, and the finches on the seeds. Grey fantails like flitting around, catching insects, especially near the water and the bushes nearby. But mainly the smaller birds, like these lower branches, lower trees and shrubs. But so they'll come in where there's a bit of protection. And in the creeks, as Damien said, we'll get frogs, which is good tucker for the birds, especially the bigger ones, and the water birds and the herons. So that's good. A lot of butterflies are attracted to the flowers, and that also provides food, grubs and things like that, caterpillars.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks very much for that. Well, we're now nearing Site 2 on our bird walk. So if you look at the brochure, we've got a little box for Site 2 and you can scan the QR code. Now, Site 2 we decided would be important because there's a large old tree, and there's not a lot of large old trees on this walk or around the region in general. So we thought we'd stop here and highlight what we believe is a manigum. But Jenny, would you say?
I think that's what we think.
That was the conclusion? Yeah, so this site is based around this large old tree on the other side. Now, you get different birds and obviously, different habitat produced in a large old tree like this. Would anyone like to comment on, perhaps Damien or Jane, about what sort of birds you might get in a large old tree? Damien?
Well, again, the trees here are pretty similar to what we saw earlier back there. And in this area, again, especially in spring, you'll get the cuckoos calling. They're probably still here, but they don't call this time of year. And grey fantails, rufous whistlers in particular, you hear a lot of them along here. And in the rushes and reeds along here, almost certainly you'll get reed warblers. Again, in spring, you've got to pick your times. They're round a lot of the other times, although reed warblers move around a bit. The other thing to remember along here, being a bike rider myself, is a lot of people ride bikes along here, and if you're birding, you want to keep an eye out for the cyclists, and cyclists should keep an eye out for the birders. But this track's used a lot, not only by walkers and dog walkers, but also by cyclists, including me. And it's surprising in the early morning the kind of birds you see, that during the day you don't see them as much. The other morning, a little bit further on, I saw the common bronzewing, but I also saw a brush bronzewing, which is unusual for this area, but I do see them in the early morning in the dense cover further along.
Great. Damien, thanks for that.
I've got something I could say
Yep, you like...
about tree hollows.
Yeah, tree hollows, that'd be good to cover that, because we don't have a great deal, do we, Jane?
No. This trees like this big old tree behind us are really important because it may contain tree hollows. Our local gum trees need to be 300 years around about to actually develop tree hollows, and of course many of our native birds and mammals rely on these tree hollows to breed. So there's lots of parrots that use tree hollows, owl-at-night jars, which have been seen along this trail before, as well as chewins, which you probably wouldn't see here, but they're an important local species. So tree hollows are really important, and that the age of that tree suggests it may support some.
That's great, Jane. And it does highlight the importance, and I know Connecting Country and the Landcare groups and have been putting out nest boxes for the reasons of there isn't a great deal of hollows. So they are very important, the large old trees. What kind of birds can we hear now, Jane, if we do a bit of a quick listen?
That sounds like some superb fairy wrens over here to me. I think they've been Australia's most popular bird at various times in the annual Birdlife survey. A lot of people will know them because they're tiny, tiny little birds with a very long tail that is often very erect and very pretty. The males, when they're breeding, are very pretty. Here there's also a red wattlebird flying past. People may see them in their gardens. They're a common garden bird. They can be a little bit bossy sometimes and push the other birds around a bit. However, they do have their place and they are important. And then I can hear some crickets.
The sounds of summer.
That's it, yes. And the gun club.
Might be the warble of a magpie to off in the
Yeah,
distance. Jenny, would you like to add to that?
I was just thinking along this stretch of the Birdwalk where it's more open is a great situation for looking out for the birds of prey or raptors. And there's quite a few that come around here from time to time. There's square-tailed kites, which are pretty exciting to see, that I think they might be nesting up the hills, up the back here. We see them so often coming around and just gliding over. And brown falcons, wedge-tail eagles you might see sailing over. So keep an eye on up the skies as well for these birds of prey soaring ahead. And keep an eye to identify them, keep an eye on how they're holding their wings, whether they're upswept or curved or flat, and the ends of the wings, etc., are good pointers as to what you might see in the way of birds of prey.
Yeah, the other birds that are along here, but in very low numbers, and you might hear, very, very difficult to see, some of the crakes and rails. They're small chook-shaped birds that forage in the tall reeds, and that they are seen from time to time, but you're more likely to hear their chick type calls than to actually see them. But yeah, something else to keep in mind in this area.
That's great, Ewan. Thanks very much for that. We might walk towards Site 3 now, which is the mistletoe site, and if we see anything along the way, we'll stop and have a chat. Just while we're walking, Damien, and you've got the mic, what difference does the time of the day make with bird watching? What do you tend to recommend people to get out and see different sorts of birds?
Well, particularly in warmer weather, either early morning or late in the afternoon tend to be a bit better. Birds don't tend to be quite as active during the day, except the raptors will be circling because of the thermals. You often see them up high early in the middle of the day. But during the day, it quietens off a bit. It's like from this time onwards, 11 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. But you still will see birds. It's just a matter of being patient and looking. Depends how fast you walk through an area or ride a bike through an area. We just saw 3 crimson rosellas fly across then.
Yes.
And they're a beautiful bird. You'll see them along here. They like the hollows in the trees, obviously. And occasionally eastern rosellas as well, which tend to be more on the ground.
Yep.
But all of those you see through here from time to time.
Terrific. And what sort of, just for a beginner that might be about to start this walk, is there any sort of gear that you'd recommend? Binoculars, do they help? That sort of stuff?
Well, binoculars is really all you need. A bit of patience and stop and listen often, rather than racing through. Especially when you're near trees like we're just getting close to now. It's always worth just stopping and listening for a while. And often you'll learn a lot about what's around just by being quiet.
which is an enjoyable part of life in an ever busy and crazy world with not much quiet. It's a good way to get out and enjoy the landscape and the peace and quiet.
Keeps me sane.
Keeps you safe.
Yeah. I'd rather do this and listen to the news any day.
Yes, well, that's right. There's plenty to hear and gain out in the landscape that'll...
There's a
keep
lot
you
of
feeling
interest,
fulfilled.
and it's surprising how many people are interested in birds. I get questions all the time from different people who are not really members of Birdlife or anything like that, but they're just interested in the birds, what they see here,
Yep.
and what they see. I was stopped actually just near here one day a while back by a woman who knew me back in winter, and she said, "What's this little bird?" She called it the bird with the high-vis jacket, which I thought was a very good description of what was in fact flame robins.
Oh,
And which are a very brightly coloured bird, and we saw them just around here, and she'd never seen them before, and she was intrigued by them
yes.
because of their bright colour.
Yes.
But those birds you'll only see, and that's what the thing is, different seasons. A lot of the robins are here in winter only, and then they move on to the high country in summer.
Ah, yes. Yep.
And the cuckoos also come and go. So it changes.
Yep.
It's not the same. It's always different times of day,
Yep.
different times of the year.
And do you think that's part of the excitement of being a bird watcher is just the fact you never know what you're
Yep,
going to...
I always like it. I call it serendipity. Whenever I go out, I never know what I'm going to see.
Yep.
And every now and then you see something quite unusual, something very beautiful.
Yep.
And so I always go out never knowing what I'm going to see. There we've got fairy wrens bouncing across there.
Ah, yes.
They're one of the most common birds, or most widespread birds. You'll see them in all sorts of places.
Yep. And they seem to have evolved to sort of live with humans a bit too,
Yep.
haven't they?
Yes,
the
they've
fairy wrens.
adapted like the magpies have adapted, the fairy wrens have adapted.
Yes.
They're even in our garden at home in the middle of Castlemaine.
Yes, wow. Amazing. So there's a bit of a fork in the track here. We tend to take the lower road, which
We'll
goes
take
along the creek.
Lower road, more trees, yes,
Yep.
rather than the horse paddock.
Now, there's all this part here been revegetated by Castlemaine Landcare, Jenny.
In the last couple of years.
Wow.
Yeah, this is on the left-hand side here. This is a fairly recent plantings.
Ah, yes,
worked
yep.
hard with a lot of nice native grasses as well.
Seem to have done pretty well,
Yeah.
you would say, yep.
Yeah, no, it's good.
What's the key to planting success, Jenny? Is there any time of the year that's better to plant native plants, do you think?
When they're going to be getting some rain afterwards would be helpful. So in winter's a good time. Winter and spring's a good time to plant.
Yep.
But I think the very important thing that the Landcare group has found is preparing the soil and the ground and the hole
Yep.
where the bushes and trees are going to go, so that they'll be able to collect water whenever it does rain or condensation, etc. So
Yep.
most important is to prepare the nice big hole. There's quite rocky soil, so
Yep.
we clear a few of the rocks out and just to give the plants a chance to get going. But you can see how successful this is here, and a lot of banksias. I saw one flowering beautifully further back, which is providing good food for the honey eaters.
Yes, great.
And yep, and there were a lot of grey fantails we just passed back there, so
Yep.
they're all pretty happy. I think we're getting to the mistletoe spot here, aren't we?
We are, yes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good mistletoe.
Just briefly, the fallen logs,
Yeah,
what sort of importance do they play in providing habitat and food for birds?
very good for many different reasons. They're providing habitat for not only birds but insects as they're rotting away. But also they're playing a pretty important role in just retaining the water in the soil
Oh,
as
yes.
it's washing down the slopes to the creek. It's just holding that water back a little bit.
Yep.
And that's a very important aspect of logs on the ground.
Yes, great.
Yeah, so as we move forward here, you'll start and see mistletoe in some of the trees, and that they're mainly in the black wattles. So we'll just move forward a little bit, and we can have a look at some of that.
Yeah, so for those that might not know much about mistletoe, Ewan, how would you describe the mistletoe plant and what's its...
Okay, the mistletoe is what they call a hemiparasite. It's not a full parasite, and that it does have its own leaves, but there's it has its own leaves. There was just a brush bronzewing flew out from under here. This is a good spot to see them. The mistletoe doesn't have roots of its own, so it grows on the branches of trees. The one we've got here, the common one here is the wire mistletoe. It's not in flower at the moment, but the mistletoes are an important food source. They are very high nutrient plants, and that so when they flower, lots of nectar. They have berries, lots of highly nutritious berries, which are food of the mistletoe bird, a small black, red and white bird that feeds almost exclusively on the seeds, and the seeds pass through the mistletoe bird and get left on the branches where the next mistletoe plant will grow. There's been some research done with mistletoes, and they found that in a woodland environment, removal of the mistletoes reduced the number of species of bird in that environment by more than 50%.
Is that right?
As well as enormous reductions in other species. And of course, because mistletoes are so nutritious, they're food for many invertebrate species. So that then flows on as food for the insectivorous birds. So, yeah.
That's great. Oh, yes, the grey currawong.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's probably quite a few other things here. Does anybody else want to add stuff?
Do you want to add some birds, Jane, that you've seen?
We've just seen a grey currawong fly overhead, and their call is quite distinctive. I'm not going to mimic it because it will sound appalling.
You can have a go.
Like the bird.
Have a go, Jane.
I've been hearing spotted pardalotes, tiny, tiny little birds. Very beautiful if you can get up close to them, which you can sometimes or let them come to you because they can be really quite curious. And they're yellow, red, and with a black head and black across the shoulders and wings covered in tiny white spots. They're quite amazing.
Wow.
And they often nest in embankments and so on, in tunnels. They like a little tunnel. And if a pile of sand at home, they'll use.
Yep.
They'll use all sorts of things. A bronzewing, here is probably a common bronzewing, took flight before, and you can hear its clap of the wings as it takes off.
Very bright colours, don't they? They have beautiful shadings in their feathers.
Yes. So they're called a bronzewing because under their wing is all bronze colour, which you don't see so often, except when they're displaying to each other, because they will actually doing territorial go away from me behaviour, because they'll put a wing up and make themselves look terribly big.
Oh, wow.
And threatening.
Yeah, right.
But yes, the colours, they have these iridescent changing colours, rainbow colours in certain feathers on their wings.
Yep.
Yeah, very beautiful.
Amazing.
If in the light just right. Yeah.
Oh, yes, Jenny's spotted another bird. I've got some more information about...
Jane was talking about the spotted pardalotes before, and that's sort of, maybe I'll mention there's a couple of really good bird apps. They're quite handy if you're not sure what a bird is. And Jane was describing the beautiful call, but I could play that now. This is the Morecambe app, and
Great.
so... So we can hear that around this area here. So these little birds, they like the taller trees, and so they're very happy in this site here.
That's great. And just on the mistletoe, as you can see with this black wattle here, it has a number of mistletoe on it, probably half a dozen, and it's not killing the tree, contrary to some people's belief that it will kill the tree. So they're not the kind of thing that you want to remove, and just as Ewan mentioned, it can really change the bird diversity and the whole sort of function of that little ecosystem. So please do live with mistletoe. They are common everywhere, and particularly on yellow gums around here, you see a lot of mistletoe. So
I think it's only in extreme circumstances that the mistletoe might overwhelm a tree, such as in drought, or where the trees are really suffering and they get too much mistletoe. But in a situation like this, it's absolutely perfect. It's a wonderful environment. A lot of the mistletoe leaves and debris will fall on the ground, and that makes lovely humus for nurturing the soil.
Well, it seems to be going pretty well, doesn't it, this black wattle?
It does indeed. Yep, great spot.
Possums build their drays in them sometimes.
Oh, do they? Yeah, okay. We might move on to site 4, which will be halfway of the bird walk. I noticed quite a lot of Callistemon and Melaleuca starting to appear here. Do you want to comment on what sort of birds might like those denser sort of medium-sized shrubs?
Well, this was a popular spot to see owlet nightjar. There was a nesting box in one of these trees.
Oh, wow.
Alas, in stormy weather a while back, the nest box fell out.
Oh.
But it used to be a very, very good spot. Owlet nightjars are very adaptable, and they've adapted to things like nest boxes. And I've seen them in drain pipes and various other parts of human habitation.
Yes.
They like this sort of cover.
Yep.
There's probably one around here still.
Right.
But they like little holes.
Yep. And are they a form of owl, or is that just
No, they're a
confusion?
separate species of nightjar. Owlet nightjars, really, it's the only species in Australia of that particular kind.
Yep.
It's people think it's an owl because it's active at night.
Yes, yes.
Although I've seen them often during the day. Some sunny days they'll be out in winter.
Yep.
They're not always a night bird.
No, okay. Now we're pretty close to site 4 with the denser shrubs here. Do you want to stop here for a little bit and just see what birds we can hear, and then you can maybe give us a bit of an overview?
This is actually quite a good spot for honeyeaters, and there's a tree behind us where we invariably get yellow-faced honeyeater chipping away, and then over the other side of the track we had brown-headed honeyeaters and possibly some other honeyeaters as well in this area, but they're enjoying the slightly taller trees and the understory, giving them a good protection. Lots of nice seeds and insects for them.
Fantastic. And is that, would you say that the smaller birds need protection from larger birds, or more sort of cats and foxes, or what's the general prey?
Well, I think they would be normally being protected from the raptors and the larger birds and currawongs and things like that might take the young ones. But cats and foxes would be a big problem here.
Yep.
And that's something we should all keep an eye on and do what we can to keep the number of cats down in the bush. And foxes is going to be a continual problem, and they love coming along the creek lines, and so they're an ever-present threat for our little critters.
And what are I could hear some very faint sort of twitching sounds up in the higher trees. What would you say they might be?
I think we can hear some weebills. Yep, tiny little bird with a little stubby beak.
Oh, yes.
And I'm sure Damien will tell you about beak shapes being a very important clue to the bird IDs.
Yes.
The weebills are very tiny little birds, and they've got that little I'm a weebill.
Yeah.
But they've got a stubby little beak and a slightly yellowish body.
Yep.
And flitter around. They've got a little scolding chitter call as well.
Yep.
But they'll be high up in the trees. And we can hear spotted puddlets again.
Ah, yes.
So it's a lovely spot here.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Very good mix of habitat types. And
So a spot like this would be a really good place to stop a while, because birds often move through in mixed flocks. So when you arrive here, if you don't hear a whole lot or see a whole lot, give it 5, 10, 15 minutes and see what comes through. It can be really quite interesting.
yep, that's great, Jane, and it's a good point. You know, it's a bit like fishing in a little way. It requires a little bit of patience and some different times of the day and different times of the year to experience the full sort of diversity that you could appreciate along here.
That's right, Ivan. And birds will move around foraging, so they're not stuck in one spot necessarily.
Yeah. That's great. Now, I believe there's been quite a few bird surveys done along this track. Would anyone like to comment about some of the bird surveys over the years and how frequently they are and some of the surprises that you might have found?
Yeah, there's regular, as Ivan said, regular surveys along this area, and that the Connecting Country, they do 4 surveys a year, 2 in winter and 2 in spring, and each of those 2, one of the winter ones is morning and the other winter one is afternoon, and similar with the spring surveys. There's also an ongoing survey which has been done along this stretch for in the order of 20 years, so building up quite a bit of information there, and that survey has been done pretty much monthly. That's a morning survey using the BirdLife Australia 2 hectare 20-minute method, and that, so we are getting a reasonable picture of the birds and bird life here. And one thing, while we're talking surveys, I might like to suggest is that in terms of restoring the habitat, which the Castlemaine Landcare group has been working on for 20 odd years, one of the ways of monitoring that is just what is coming back. And so if you're walking along here, I'd urge you to photograph not just birds, but any other life forms you see, so plants that are in flower, insects, reptiles, and if you record the location of that and load those sightings onto iNaturalist, the Castlemaine Landcare and Field Naturalists Club, we're using iNaturalist to record what is here and get a picture of what is here. So anyone's sightings along here that they load onto iNaturalist will contribute to our knowledge of the restoration area and how the biodiversity is improving over time.
That's great, Ewan, and it's a very good point. You know, that's sort of citizen science at its best, really, because there is really, unfortunately, no one else out there doing these kind of surveys, and the community is doing a fantastic job in picking up that slack and just monitoring trends and putting forward sort of changes to management or things that might need to happen. Jane, you got something to add to that?
Yeah, they're really important points that have been made by Ewan and Ivan. And birds, we're focusing on birds today, but birds don't live in isolation. They use and consume plants, insects, flower, nectar, all sorts of resources. So having the full range of food available to them means that they can exist here. Without that, their food web breaks down. Everything is connected to everything else. No single species can survive in isolation. So I think it's quite important that, that if you take one resource away, that can impact a community really seriously.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Good points, Jane. That's great. We might keep walking on to Site 5, which is some signage about some of the native vegetation and a bit of a look at the creek as well, because it is Forest Creek that we're walking along today. The one thing about this track that you do need to keep an eye out for is bike riders, of course. Yeah. It's a shared track.
Damien's coming along.
Yeah, that's right. Damien's one of them.
I always politely say, "Excuse me, can I squeeze past?"
In fact, bird watching and bike riding together is becoming quite a thing.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Oh,
yep.
yes.
Yep. Jane just mentioned the bird watching and bike riding together is becoming a thing. I guess Damien started that thing. Did you, Damien?
I've done it all my life, really.
So do you think any of these plants are starting to sort of self-seed now? Or are these still sort of all original plantings in here? Ewan or Jenny?
Yeah, so down by the creek are some of the earlier plantings and that, so yeah, they're well established. They're providing seeds, and we're starting to get second generation of some of the wattles.
Great.
In contrast, on the left, we've got an area of dense sifton bush, and that's a pioneer plant. Comes in, one of the first plants to come in after ground disturbance, and all that area there has been turned over for the gold mining. There's no topsoil, so we're really back to starting from the beginning in terms of soil and vegetation.
Yep.
But that sifton bush, it can be a bit of a fire risk, but it's a temporary thing. And if you look up through there, you'll see that there are some of the other wattles and eucalypts that are starting to take hold. They will eventually grow up over the sifton bush, and the sifton bush will die, and you'll finish with a more open understory with a tree canopy. But all this takes time, and there's been 170 years of land degradation over much of this country, so a long, slow process to bring it back to a healthy state. We're looking, we need to have a vision of centuries when we look at some of this restoration work.
Yeah, it's a good point, Ewan. It's I know the Jara people call it upside down country, where it's all been turned up and over, and it is a long process to restore this, but it is great to have some local groups that are certainly doing a terrific job in starting that process. Now, we are at Site 5 here on the brochure, which is highlighted by a great native plant signage, Indigenous plants of the region. So that was put together, I believe, by Castlemaine Landcare.
Is
that right, Ewan? Yep. And the Shire by the look of as well. So they've got another QR code that you can scan here, which is terrific, and find out about those plants. But there's also something that Jenny would like to feature, which is the Indigenous Plants of Castlemaine and Surrounds brochure, which you might have seen around. That's also available at the Tourist Information Centre and Connecting Country as well. Jenny would like to add a few words about that.
This is a wonderful brochure that packs a lot of beautiful plants in very nicely, showing the key points. But Yeah, this is a great way to sort of look out for things, especially during spring when things are flowering, a bit easier to see. But yeah, it just shows what the amazing diversity of our countryside is around here. There's some lovely water holes down here that are really good for the water birds. We often see swallows, welcome swallows, flying over, catching insects, grey fantails again. But a lot of little honey eaters at the end of a hot day, they'll come down on the edge of the water, and so it's a really great chance just to sit quietly, as Damien's always stressing, up on the hill there, and just watch the birds that are coming down to the water, and that gives you a chance to try and identify them.
That's great, Jenny. That's a really good point, just how important these water holes are, and it's been a particularly good summer and spring for rain over the last year, so it's looking pretty good at the moment, but the amount of species that would frequent that water hole would be quite an interesting study in its own right. Are there any other birds, Damien, that you like to sort of talk about here?
What I should mention is how you go about identifying them. We've talked about all these different birds, particularly the small birds, the pardalotes and the thornbills and so on. And I always say start with the bill, because especially with the smaller birds, they all look in the distance pretty similar. But if you look closely at the bill, it helps to have binoculars. With the bill, if it's pointed, then you've probably got a thornbill, so you've narrowed it down. If it's thick and stumpy, you've either got the wee bill, which is Australia's smallest bird, that's a good indicator of size, or the pardalotes, who both of those have a thicker bill. So just that action eliminates a lot of birds, makes it much easier. If you're looking at slightly bigger birds, the honey-eaters tend to have longer bills, and the bills are often curved. And if you look closely at them, they'll stick their tongue out, and it looks like a brush. You can need binoculars to do that. But so just a quick glance at a bird will often narrow it down quite a bit. And I think that's important, especially if you're just starting out. How do I even start? There's all these little brown jobs, as they call them, and they can be very confusing. I mean, around here, there could be a few different birds, and I'm hearing whistlers now at the moment. So always start off with that, and also the kind of habitat, because if you're talking about crakes and rails, you're talking about other birds along the edge like the herons and the reed warblers, then they're going to be down in the lower, wetter areas. The other birds, the thornbills vary, like I said before, the butterbums, they like the open grassy areas, so you'll see them in more open places. The brown thornbills, striated thornbills, will be in the foliage more, as will the mistletoe birds, and they're often near mistletoe. So a combination of look closely at the bird and also related to the habitat that you're looking at will often make it much easier to narrow things down.
That's great, Damien. Do you want to add something to that, Jenny?
The other birds that we occasionally see in the water holes and through the reed beds here are the ducks. There's not a big range of ducks, mainly Pacific black ducks that we've seen. Have you seen many others, Damien?
Wood duck occasionally.
Wood duck occasionally, yeah. But
they were breeding along here. There was a whole lot of
oh
young
yeah.
wood duck.
But you'll just find the ducks just quietly sniffing around in the reed beds, quietly on the edge, and if you walk along quietly, you might see them before they fly off.
Yep, that's great, and they are rather large birds just to be able to see the ducks, so the good starting point. Was that the golden whistler?
That's the rufous whistler.
Rufous whistler.
Calling over there beautifully.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Do you want to talk
Yeah,
about
quite
whistlers?
common along here.
Whistler
Yeah,
ID, whistler
The
ID?
rufous whistler calls more in spring, but it will call all time of year. They seem to be resident along here. I've seen them quite a bit, often 3 or 4 birds, well, especially along this section up as far as Verlin Street.
Yep.
And they seem to like, I think it's the dense habitat, and the male is quite a striking bird with the rufous front and then the white and black bib. It quite stands out. The other one I see very rarely here is the golden whistler. It looks very similar, except its front is golden, not rufous.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Damien. We might make our way... parrots? Yeah, we might do that while we're walking to the next site.
I did talk about the crimson and the eastern.
You can talk about them, Jane, while we're walking to the next site.
I dob myself into that.
The parrots, yes. There
Yeah.
are plenty of parrots. I know the average person that probably hasn't done any bird watching just calls them all parrots. What are we talking about when we talk about parrots? What sort
Parrots are the best.
of- right. You're colourful on your shoulder.
Yeah, so here often you would see sulphur-crested cockatoos, probably one of our most well-known parrots, flying over usually. Galahs also, and long-billed corellas. Sometimes you can see little corellas, which are easily confused with long-billed. So if you see a corella, you've got to be a little bit careful that it's not a little, but it's most likely to be a long-billed.
Yep.
And so all of those species, you'll usually see them flying over. However, they like the open country to forage for seed and so on, and they also like the trees to
Yep.
forage for gum nuts and so on.
Yep.
And then some of the lorikeets, like the musk lorikeet, is
Yep.
a common sight in Castlemaine.
Yep.
And it would be along here too when the gums are flowering. So they feed on the nectar. So do we get a few rainbow lorikeets.
Yep.
They have a brush-like tongue, like the honey eaters.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that they like eating nectar.
Yep.
They're probably the main parrot species that you're likely to see
Yep.
through here. Yeah.
Yep. No, look, and I think, yes, some yellow-tailed
yeah,
black cockatoos.
Good
Yep.
point.
Yep, so they
Yeah.
like seeds as well, is that right?
Yeah, they do. They like seeds. They're a large parrot, so they come in for the pine plantations.
Yes, they love it.
Yeah. And they would eat gum nuts and so on as well, some of the bigger seeds and nuts.
Yep.
Incredibly powerful bill.
Yep.
Yeah, the pressure that the larger parrots can exert with their bills is phenomenal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, they tend to be in pairs as well, the black cockatoos, is that right?
Yeah, in pairs or small flocks.
Small flocks, yep.
Yeah, or sometimes, in fact, I've seen them up to like 50 birds at a time. It sort of depends, but often smaller flocks.
Yep.
In fact, the parrots will pair for life.
Right. Wow.
So they'll often be in a pair at the very least.
Yep.
But they're incredibly social, so they will know, heaps and heaps of other birds. They'll have lots of friends.
Yep. Social butterflies of the world. Yep.
Yeah, they are. In fact, not so unlike our social structures in
Yeah.
a lot of ways.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now we're just about to get to Site 6 here, everyone, which is the Forest Creek crossing. There's a beautiful large pool here that looks like it's very well full this summer, which is a good sign. It's still flowing. What sort of species would you expect to see around this pool, Jane? I guess pretty much everything, but what's the more common species you might see zipping around?
Well, there's fantastic reeds here. So reed warbler is the first species that comes to mind if you're lucky. Because the shrubs around, then you've got plenty of mid-story. So you would see a lot of the birds that we've mentioned associated with the mid-story, so the honey eaters, thornbills and so on. Jenny was mentioning the Pacific black ducks earlier, so you may get some water birds here, crakes and rails, if you listen out for them, which Ewan mentioned earlier. In fact, you would have birds coming down here for water who don't necessarily use this habitat for feeding so much, so they may travel for the water. And it is spectacular for this summer. I can see tadpoles down there, so you might get white-faced heron. Yeah, and so birds like white-faced herons or some of the other birds that like to stalk in waterways and grab unsuspecting invertebrates and fish and so the life here is incredible. I can see plenty of dragonflies and there's, this is a toddler's dream, I think, with a parent or guardian hanging onto their back of their pants so they don't fall in. But it's just teeming with life.
The other thing that we get a lot here is, because it's more open water, a lot of the swallows and grey fantails are coming in and catching the insects that Jane talked about. So there's lots of smaller insects too, and these swallows are just swooping over and catching the insects. They love this more open water. I think we can hear a striated pardalote that was calling up there too. So a slightly different call, but very similar looking to the spotted, but a striated pardalote. We can hear spotted pardalotes calling, that little beep beep beep.
I think it's a pardalote right now.
Oh, yep, so just up in the tree there, just swooped over the water. So there's an important point about waterways as well, isn't it? Is to have some vegetation in the waterways, which encourages the insects to breed in the waterways, and then the insects will hatch over the waterways, which will then bring birds into those, into the hatchings, really, don't they? And brings about diversity, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, just emphasise that these water holes here are actually permanent water holes. They don't dry out.
Yep.
The creek may look dry, but there's actually a significant subsurface water flow down the valleys through the gravels, and the water only comes to the surface where it's held back by bands of rock that force it up, and that's where you get these pools. And that's the pools are a very important part of the habitat through here.
Yep, that's great.
How much does the water level change seasonally?
It can, when the creek's flowing, the water will be up to the edge of the grassy vegetation here on my right, flowing through across the sand and gravel bar there. So when the creek's full, the water would be another 50 to 60 centimetres higher than what it is now. We've had a fairly wet year this year, but a couple of years ago the water was back down to sort of around the edge of the reeds, bulrushes that are growing there. So I guess the total up and down movement would be maybe 1 metre to 1.5 metres.
Yep, that's great. We might move on towards Site 7 now, but we might have a chat about how people get involved in the various groups around here, starting with the Birdlife Castlemaine district and then moving on to the Castlemaine Field Nats. So Jane, how would people find Castlemaine Birdlife, and what do you guys do, and what would they enjoy being involved in?
Yeah, well, we've got a very active community. The way to get involved with us is to get onto the Birdlife website, and we have Castlemaine District has a web page where you can find our email address, so you can contact us through that. Also, we have a Facebook page and you can contact us through that. There's also our email on that page too. And our events are also on both pages. So the events that we hold are a monthly birdwalk, which is, well, I would say it's a lot of fun, wouldn't I?
Yes, you would.
Being a complete bird nerd. We have all ages.
Yep.
Some really quite small kids come along sometimes. We have some incredibly knowledgeable kids, which put all the adults to shame. It's fantastic. So, yeah, anyone is welcome. Doesn't matter if you're a complete beginner or we have some incredibly experienced bird watchers and everything in between.
Yep.
And everybody helps everybody else out.
Yep.
The other thing that we do is, in fact, my baby, is nature journaling,
Yes.
which looks at... Oh, we have to interrupt because there's a grey shrike thrush up in a tree that's calling, as well as thornbills foraging in the mistletoe.
It's like they've stopped to put on a little show for us.
They have,
here in the video.
yeah, and
What would they be looking for in the mistletoe? Insects, do you think, or some of the berries?
yeah, I would say insects at this time of year, and also looking at the species that's in there, which is a thornbill. So I think they're big gleaning insects, and the grey shrike thrush would also be looking for insects.
So they have a beautiful call, the grey shrike thrush, is that right?
Oh, they have the most incredible variety of calls, actually. It's, yeah, very melodious, very pretty. They're a very soft grey bird, sort of mid-sized bird, sort of grey-brown, bit of brown in there. And if you look closely, they are in fact quite beautiful to look at, despite being colours that let them disappear into the bush, so they can be a bit hard to see. But yeah, their call is very distinctive and very beautiful.
Now, I know in the past you've mentioned that some birds can mimic other birds. So that,
Yeah.
do grey shrike thrushes do that? Or
Not that I'm aware of. Magpies will. There's a lot of species that will. It's quite important sometimes that you actually look at the species that's calling to work out exactly what it is, because, yeah, quite a butcherbirds is another one. Extremely good mimics, and they can well and truly fool you. Yeah,
that's the tricky part, isn't it, about starting off bird watching, is just trying to work out who's mimicking who.
Yeah.
So I guess you got to get the binoculars out and have a good look.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I found it's one of the local four-legged walkers. Thanks.
All good.
Bit of bird watching on her bike.
That's right.
What were we talking
We were talking about the mimicking.
Oh, yeah,
which
mimicking.
birds mimicking.
That's right, yes. And so probably one of the hardest things as a beginner bird watcher is pinning a call to a bird, because I can hear grey fantails and the whistler. Yeah, Rufus whistler.
I can see a honey eater up in there of some sort. Is that a white-throated?
Oh, that's the whistler.
Oh, that's the whistler.
That's the Rufus whistler
That's the Rufus
calling.
whistler,
So if you can do what we're doing now, which is we're looking at the bird and hearing it call.
Yep.
And that makes a huge difference, because it gets in your head what the bird looks like and sounds like.
Yes.
That makes a really big difference. So if you can do that, which is not always easy, but that's sort of what you should aim for.
Yep. Oh, that's great, Jane. So this is the start
And I'll just add that bird calls are a endless journey of learning. All of us here have sent emails to each other going, what do you think this is? Both sending images and calls. So it's an endless process of learning. It'll keep you engaged your entire life.
And that's the beauty of the community, I guess. If you don't know, there are plenty of people that probably will.
That's right. And in fact, we get emails from people to our Birdlife page, to our Birdlife, with people wanting to know what a particular call or describe something they've seen, and it's quite fun. It sends you down all sorts of rabbit holes trying to work out what these species are that people have picked up in various places.
So we're pretty much in Site 7 now, which is the denser understory, which has got a lot of this acacia. Jane or Damien, who would... sorry, I've just cleared my throat. Or Jenny, what sort of acacia is this one that's very common all the way through here?
I think this is this Wirilda, Ewan? Yes. Yeah, the Wirilda
Yep.
wattle, with lots of seeds. But this is a great spot along here. It's very dense, as you can see on the left, with understory and taller trees.
Yes.
And on the right as well, some taller trees out in the next door property. But this is really good. It's often where we see the cuckoos when they're in town.
Yes,
A
right.
variety of cuckoos, the horsefields and the other bronze cuckoo and the fantail cuckoos.
Yep. Yep.
Yep, but a lot of honey eaters as well and little birds as well.
Yep.
And I've just been hearing the yellow thornbill,
Ah,
and that's got quite a distinctive call.
terrific.
Not the whistler that's calling. He's a little thornbill, and he's just got a little bit of marking around the eyes, a peachy chest,
Yep.
and a little bit yellowish on the side. But his call, he does it chit-chit. And unlike the striated thornbill is just tss, 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 tss. But this yellow thornbill goes chit-chit,
Yep.
chit-chit. And I can hear him calling in the trees up here too. So this is a great sight, and we can hear the whistler beautifully calling.
Fantastic. Just while I've still got you, Jenny, just on Castlemaine Landcare and the Castlemaine Field Naturalists Club, is it, or group? Club. How would you describe those two groups, and how do people get involved, and what sort of activities would you do?
Well, the Castlemaine Landcare group, they've got a website, and they've got signs along the walk here. So they've got contact numbers there, and you just have to let them know you're interested, and they'll send you emails and let you know when the working bees are on. That's the main thing that you can do to help there, which is what we need. And we get a lovely mix of young people and older people
Great.
coming along, helping out. It's good fun.
Yep.
And with the Castlemaine Field Naturalists Club, again, we've got a website, and we hold monthly meetings, except for January, on the second Friday of the month in the evening. And we get a range of speakers, and during the pandemic it's been great that we can get speakers from all round by Zoom.
Yep.
And so we've had a lovely mix of speakers
Terrific.
talking about all sorts of topics. And then the following Saturday in the afternoon we usually have an excursion.
Yep.
And just go somewhere to a point of interest. But there's lots of other activities as well. There's roadside clean-ups, and there's needlegrass monitoring and
Wow.
weeding with Margaret Panther, and
Yep.
other activities like that we help out with. And there's various projects that are on the go, like repeat bird surveys, repeat photo points, and things that we're ongoing monitoring.
Fantastic. That's great. You might hand back over to Damien, and we'll walk on towards side 8 and just see what birds we can hear along the way. It sounds like a good mix though between all those groups of a bit of education and a bit of science, a bit of hands-on stuff, as well as a bit of education and research-based learning, which is great to hear.
Well, this site shows you what the effective Landcare work over years has done and the big difference it makes to bird populations. Because before these shrubs and trees were here, it was just a moonscape of garbage,
Wow.
really. And, or upside down country as it was referred to.
Yes.
And this planting has really allowed a whole lot of birds to repopulate the area.
Yep.
They've come back in droves, really,
Yep.
and quite a range of different birds. And that's really is a testament to the efforts of getting planting going in any sort of area. And I find this very interesting because it's very good for birds all the way along.
Yep. Yeah, it's really a bit of a showcase in a way, isn't it, as to what time and a whole lot of dedication can do, and people.
Yep, it's all done by
Coming together.
volunteers, really, and bronzewing on the track there.
Yep. Yeah, it's amazing, and that's sort of part of what the video was aiming to do, was to sort of highlight, some of the work of the volunteers that you can see, but then also the surveys and some of the work that's been done to kind of monitor what has changed with that vegetation coming in and starting to get a bit more complex.
Yep, it's slow motion. It's not an instant thing, it takes years, but a bit of effort really does produce quite remarkable effects.
What have been some of the surprise birds that you've seen here over the years, Damien? I know you've been walking this track quite a lot.
Oh, for about 11 years, yeah.
11 years? There must have been a few ones that raised your eyebrows and you thought, could it be?
The brush bronzewing is very uncommon. I've seen that a bit in more recent years than earlier.
Yep.
Goshawks like it because there's a lot of small birds. That's dinner for goshawks.
Oh, is it? Yes.
Back near the bridge there's a favourite spot early in the morning with the mad staring gaze of the goshawk. And things like the square-tailed kite I've seen occasionally, and brown falcons.
Yep.
There's quite a mixture of birds here, and very occasionally I've seen white-necked heron, which is quite a stately bird, a bit bigger than the white-faced heron we saw before.
Yep.
But I've also seen this whole area underwater in 2011. You can see back further, some of the fences are damaged.
So all the way across the plain?
That bridge is new because the other one floated away, or what was left of it.
Well, there you go.
Okay. Yeah,
Good.
we're now into especially around the edge here where there's a bit of grass and a bit of cover.
Yep.
Red-brow finches love that, and you'll get a lot of those around. There's big groups of them. Yeah, the bronzewing's been flying up a little ahead of us and then stopping and then flying up again.
Yes.
I see that often in the mornings.
Do they?
Yeah.
Do they lead us the way, do they?
Yes, whereas the brush bronzewing tends to scurry away. It doesn't fly, it just scurries off into the scrub.
Now, the finches tend to be in flocks, or are they a solitude bird? Yep.
Yes, they're generally in groups. At this time of year you see a mix of adult and young, and the young birds don't have much red on them at all. They look quite drab in comparison to the adults.
Oh, yep.
But I've seen quite a few young, which is a good sign that the breeding has been happening. They will have nests in this scrubby stuff.
Yep.
A very untidy ball of grass and stuff.
Yes, okay.
And of course there are lots of kangaroos here, especially early in the morning. Oh, there goes the bronzewing again.
Yep.
Not really fussed. And there's a lot of wattle seed now, which I think has become a permanent home for the bronzewings.
Oh, I see. Right, so bronzewings tend to have a nest on the ground, do they?
No, they're up in the... Very often the nest looks terrible. You wonder it even stays together. I've seen them in peculiar places.
Yeah.
But clearly they're successful.
Now, there's another thing that I was going to ask you about, Damien, before we finish. I think you've been focusing your efforts on a birdwalk book as well. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your Castlemaine birdwalks?
That's what I've been doing. I've written on this walk is in one of my books.
Yep.
And I've done one for Castlemaine, I've done one for Victoria, and now I'm working on one birding the rail trails.
Ah.
Because I found them a very interesting combination of old vegetation in places.
Yes.
And so that's my next obsession.
Rail
I've always
trails.
got another obsession. But the Castlemaine bird book has sold over 2,000 copies, so clearly there are a lot of people interested in it.
Fantastic.
I am continuing to be astonished by the whole thing.
Yep. That's a good sign, isn't it? That,
yes.
People are showing an interest and there's a new generation coming through. So we're now at Site 8, which is the last site on our birdwalk. I think Jenny's going to give us an overview about what's happening here, because this is a bit of a work in progress.
If we can just walk quietly up, there's a frog calling in here. So. And we'll come around to the corner here to see the... Oh. So we're coming up to the what the Landcare group calls the Indigenous Food and Fibre site. A lot of work is going in here to try and get a grassland community with some of the foods, the Aboriginal tucker, bush tucker, in particular the murnong or the yam daisy. There's been a lot of efforts to try and propagate and plant the yam daisy. There's some nardoo in the creek here that's been established now, and that was a very important food for the Aborigines to grind down and cook into like a damper. And a lot of grassy plants that would be used for basket making, etc. A lot of little daisies and things. So they're trying to establish a grassland community over there with bush tucker. You can hear the frogs. It's probably the common eastern froglet.
It's a good sign, isn't it,
Yep.
in
Healthy waterways, yep.
this time of the year for frogs to be calling?
This is also a good spot here when you just stand and listen. To our right here, there's a lot of established shrubs and trees, often full of honeyeaters and whistlers, grey fantails. We might see the occasional robin around, scarlet robin.
Yep.
Out on the more open areas, we've often got magpies, lapwings,
Yep.
and maybe some corellas and cockatoos grazing when there's tucker out there for them.
Yeah, it's a bit of a... Would you say this site used to be a bit more weedy and degraded, and it's been a
This
site...
was absolute shocker.
Was
It was
it?
full of gorse and broom, and there's still little gorse sprigs coming up all the time. It's a continual battle
Yep.
to keep that under control, but hopefully once we get the native plants,
Yeah, it's looking
it'll,
good.
beat them into submission. But if you look at the early photos along here after the gold mining days, it was just totally a mass of gorse and
Wow.
broom. Shocker.
Hard to imagine.
Yeah, so a lot of work. The field gnats did a lot of work here helping to clear it up too
Have
in
they?
the early days.
Oh, terrific.
Yep.
Yep, so the field gnats do a bit of hands-on stuff as well.
Yeah, in the
working
early
bees.
days they were very active. Yeah.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah, that lovely frog.
Isn't it great?
Yeah. But when the reed warblers were in town, they were singing all along through the reed beds here. It was just brilliant. Yeah.
Wow. So when do they tend to come in to
In
town?
spring, yeah, the reed warblers. Yeah, we
Okay.
had a nice collection of them right along the creek, calling along. Yeah,
Yep. And where do they go? Sort of
they
summer.
go north.
Do they go north? All right.
Yeah, move up and down.
Like some of the humans.
Ewan, would you like to talk about?
Yeah, would you like to say anything, Ewan? This is our last site.
Yeah, I guess this is, Jenny said, very much a work in progress with the getting the native plants established, but it is improving and will continue to improve in that. One of the things that I'd also like to mention relating to the field gnats is that we also have a website, Castlemaine Flora, the wildflowers of the Castlemaine district. That's a very comprehensive website covering the botany of the area. So for people that are interested in the flowers and trees and that they're seeing, that's a good resource, local resource to look at. And that's there. The other point, now that we're at the end of the walk, I'd just like to say that during the course of our walk down here, we've actually seen around about 28 species of bird.
Fantastic.
For that.
It's terrific.
More than 80 individuals, probably a lot more, but and that we've also heard 2 species of frog and seen eastern grey kangaroos, so that's just in a casual walk. So this is a good spot for seeing the local wildlife. So
Butterflies.
yeah, butterflies, dragonflies, lots of that. So yeah,
That's great.
lots of things to see along this walk.
That's fantastic, Ewan. Very well summed up there, and we've been, reasonably noisy and talking. We haven't stood still for very long a lot of the time, so you'd probably cover even a few more species. But I think we'll just wrap up now that we're at the end of the walk. A huge thank you for those that have made it all the way through our video. Of course, don't forget that it'd be great to pick up a copy of this brochure in order to do the walk. We've got a map for you. We've got the QR codes which you can scan at each site, and it's got the full list of birds that have been seen at each site. A huge thank you to Castlemaine Landcare Group for all their works, as well as the Castlemaine Field Naturalist Club, as well as Birdlife Castlemaine, our partners in this project. They've all put in a huge amount to make this what it is, and it's a tribute to their efforts over the last few decades. So thank you again to Parks Victoria for funding this project, and we'll say goodbye, everyone. Over and out.